background? I know you guys from different places in Canada.
I'm actually American. I'm from the U.S.
Okay, yeah.
That's me.
Where in the U.S.?
From Massachusetts.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a French Québécois, and I'm Montrealer. I've been living here for 15 years. Grew up in a town called Trois-Rivières, an hour and a half from here, maybe.
Cool.
I was born in Chatham, Ontario, and grew up mostly in Kitchener, Ontario. And I moved to Montreal about 5 years ago.
How would you guys describe your music?
It's a little tough to pin down, but a couple terms we often use are creative instrumental music or alt jazz, standing for alternative jazz, because basically we like to take a bunch of different aspects of music that we all enjoy and incorporate them into what we do, which is coming kind of from a jazz background. And but we're taking rock, we're taking blues, we're taking sort of world music, for lack of a better term, and we're kind of putting that all together.
So what are your influences?
I think on our instrument we each have different people we look upon, but in terms of bands, I think Eric and I listen to lots of rock, and when we met, actually it was because we had a few bands that we really liked, and we could we found some connection in the kind of music that had nothing to do with jazz. But then we started to play together, and I don't know how to say. I don't know what our influences. I'm sorry.
I think there's a lot of obvious influences in terms of when someone who doesn't know us listens to our music, what they hear. Maybe a little bit of obviously progressive jazz is a big one. So artists like Dave Holland, and there's a band called The Bad Plus. People who experiment with odd times, but also even 90s grunge. There's sort of that tone in there a little bit too. And then there's a lot of other influences that maybe aren't as obvious. I think we all listen to a fair bit of modern classical music, and a lot of other different things like local bands.
I'm glad you mentioned local bands. That was my next question.
Okay.
What local bands do you listen to, or do you really like, or are your influences?
Ben by Elephants.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a band called Park X Trio that I think they're sort of in our age category as well, and they're kind of doing sort of a similar thing to us. Besides that, yeah, I don't know if you guys.
Honestly, when I haven't been listening to too much local bands recently. I don't know.
Are there older Quebec influences? I know there's a huge jazz scene in Montreal. And
Yeah, right.
I think there are people that we probably each respect. Some of those things cross over. Maybe we can all agree on certain Quebec jazz musicians that we all like. But on the other hand, one thing we're trying to do that's kind of different from the scene here is we're trying to have a band. It's the three of us, and it doesn't change. This is the band. It's not like we have a gig and these two can't make it, so I call up two other guys and say, hey, I want to play a gig as Kite. It's no, if someone can't make it, it's not Kite. It's so that's a really important sort of line, I guess, that we like to draw in the sand. And so, yeah, there are lots of people that we respect. Oh my God, there are drummers in town that I really like. There are guitar players and bass players that I think we all agree, yeah, there's some people that we look up to. But bands,
could you name a few?
For me, I like on drums. I like Jim Doxis. Who else? I mean, there's a lot. Philippe Melanson is someone who's in my age group who's pretty amazing. There's tons of guys.
Yeah, me too. Guitar players, there's tons of. One of my favorites is Tom Eliasoft. Really awesome guitar player. Nicolas Ferron. There's François Jalbert that I like too. But like Eric said, in terms of bands, there are not so many jazz bands in Montreal. So I think I like musicians. I like the way they play, but I can't name a band. Park X is a band.
Yeah.
That's not.
So is that common in Montreal to have bands that sort of reinvent their lineup, that like you mentioned?
Well, for jazz musicians, not that much reinventing their lineup, but it's more like one musician, like the band leader will be featured, the ex quartet, you know, like this guy quartet, and he's gonna have like support musicians or like a kind of a band, and as much as possible, he's gonna want to develop something with that band. But very often, you know, like good bass players are really busy, and if it's common that if somebody has a gig that pays more or that has been previously scheduled, he's not gonna be able to make it. So there's gonna be a sub, and that sub's gonna read charts and like try to make the best, you know, possible. Yeah, it's very common, I think, in jazz to have interchangeable bands, yeah, pieces of the band.
So the static band is something you guys are trying to bring to.
Yeah, and it's not a common thing for jazz.
Can you name some of your influences on your instrument?
On my, yeah, I mean, there's a guy named Fraser Hollins, who's a bass player in Montreal here, who I've studied with, and I'd say he's been an influence on my playing. You mean like in terms of more local?
Yeah.
Trying to think of who else I consider an influence in Montreal. Sebastien Pellerin is another guy. He's there's, I mean, for me, there's actually a lot of really great jazz bass players in Montreal that I'm kind of like, I want to say intimidated, but just like it's kind of like they're so good at what they do that I kind of just try to do my own thing and you know, just sort of go my own way because what they do is already there and it's already that good. So as far as influences that directly influence my playing, there's not as many that way.
So would you say your more historical influences are more American or from elsewhere rather than from Quebec?
I'd say yeah, for jazz music, you know, like the kind of the birthplace of jazz is New York, and it's still a very like thriving scene, like incredibly prolific, you know, like in terms of like the players that come out of New York, or that people want to go to New York for a certain period of time. And I think, yeah, we're very American influence, and more European too, because we're influenced by some classical music, some modern classical music, and it seems like European jazz musicians are more influenced by that than that like American jazz. But of course, you know, like you have to go through like, you know, like the traditional musician, you know, like the Coltrane's, the Miles Davis, which are American.
There's also actually a lot of people that you don't necessarily think of being from Montreal, but are actually from Montreal. But
Yeah.
like Oscar Peterson, for example,
Yeah.
like I'd say that's probably a pretty big influence. Anyone who plays jazz is going to be influenced by him. There's another piano player named Paul Blais, who's from Montreal as well. But again, you don't think of him as from Montreal. You think of him as from from New York or wherever, because that's where he recorded his albums and stuff.
And
Gil Evans as well is another example of someone who's from here, and for me especially, like his composing has been a big influence. But again, his band, like he worked with Miles Davis, that was kind of his most popular thing, and that was all in New York, so you don't really think of them as necessarily being from Montreal, but they are.
Yeah.
So